Today we're going to be talking about a different way of finding passions that may not be your standard advice out there. I wanted to bring this topic up because I remember a few years ago I really wanted to explore this idea of following your passion and making a career out of your passion. At the time, you'd be surprised how little info was out there about it on YouTube and so forth. So I consumed almost everything out there, and it was mostly like TED Talks and stuff, and a few random YouTubers, a few courses, and a few books like So Good They Can't Ignore You. Now the field has blossomed a bit, but I think there's still a lot of hang up. There's still a lot of people who are very much focused on sometimes purely the money, especially those coming from Asian countries and so forth. I rank for the term Asian parents. I rank number one for that on my blog. And you get a lot of comments from posts like that, just sharing the angst of these second generation Asian immigrants who are just really struggling, whether they're in Canada, the US, or somewhere else, because their parents really want them to just basically pursue something that they know has a high income and high status, like doctor and lawyer. But in the last decade, maybe last 2 decades, the world has changed. It's opened up. It's allowed for a lot more opportunities and a lot more growth and understanding about the science of happiness. So I'm not going to stress on why too much, but I want to touch on why this is important. And without further ado, let's touch about this one thing that I don't think is really mentioned enough in terms of finding your passion and income with it. And what that is really allowing yourself to understand that your passions can change over time. This has happened to me, and I've observed it in myself in various ways. There have a lot of examples, but for the first example, I want to touch on my love of history. Now, if you had told me back in middle school or high school that I would one day like history, I'd be like, no, not really. I thought it was a lot of like boring facts, usually about the government, that I just really found annoying. It was a lot of reading and memorization, basically. And so I was like, I'm never going to like history. This is just a class that I have to learn the game so that I could basically do better and get good grades. And then, bye-bye history. But over time, what I discovered is that there's a lot of different facets of history. History is a very broad term. And then the U.S. government history is just one class in that. And there are already little inklings of signs that I may like history more than I thought. But I never really dove deep into it. There was, Greek mythology, that whole period. There's the Renaissance. And then there was one class I took that was more world history. And you got to see some really cool things about how Africa is and how the world changed over time and how certain things affected the world. And I started, and that class was great. We saw the teacher was actually fun, and I was able to see a few documentaries here and there. Those were some of my favorite classes, not just because we just got to sit there and watch TV, but also because those documentaries had some really nice stuff. They made it very captivating about like how wars were fought, how people died and stuff. So then there's also the history of warfare and why certain people succeeded, certain people failed. There's also some very tragic history about how basically famine or disease or basically a more civilized, or I guess developed, I wouldn't say civilized in the sense that they slaughtered so many people, basically won out over another civilization. And so despite all that, there was just signs. But then over time, years later, when I never really thought I would ever get into history again, I started to really get into personal development, as you can tell with my YouTube channel. And I discovered that a lot of growth can come from learning from history. Because, like it or not, most people fail to study history and they end up repeating it. And I mean that even in the most pop culture sense. There's a ton of YouTubers who make the same mistakes because they don't really think about it. There's a ton of YouTubers who get really famous and then they get canceled, even though they could have avoided it if they'd seen the YouTubers before who got canceled for the same reasons years ago, whether that was through sexual abuse or saying something wrong or uh, just being a dick or something else, or not even canceled, but like usually the fallacies of the young happen again. You know, another huge trend I'm seeing in the last few years are these young kids, 18, 19, 22, 24, like Jake Paul or Rice Gum or whatnot, and they get very egotistical about how amazing they are, and they flaunt their wealth. This has not been the first time that's happened, and there's consequences of that, which some people are willing to shoulder, but it's better to be prepared and understand the cost of that. It can create jealousy, it can create all sorts of issues that can lead to your downfall. And through reading books like Robert Greene's books, which he provides so much history in the past about the failures and the consequences of this, you really get a better understanding of what works and what doesn't. So then I started really getting into history, and there's different types of history to choose from, and that I started to really like. There's the Art of War, and there's even an illustrated copy now that gives specific examples from certain battles across the history of human civilization, which it just gets really cool. And so, long story short, that's one example of how something that I used to not like, just when introduced in a new way, I started to like. And there's various other examples of how that's happened. For example, there's stuff that I knew about in the past that I didn't like then, that I like now. And stuff that I didn't even know about that I encountered. And so those are two things you have to keep in mind. There's stuff like hip hop dance and salsa that back in the day I just didn't have an interest in. I liked watching it. I was a big fan of America's Best Dance Crew, the TV show America's Got Talent and all that stuff, and I loved watching dance. But it was only years later when I saw BTS come out that it really incited a more motivating drive for me to actually say like, hey, I actually want to learn that. And so that affected things. And then, there's stuff that I just felt neutral about or really didn't consider an interest, like writing, storytelling, blogging, online business, because you're just in a different state, a different time, a different maturity in life. And that creates different interests. You're oftentimes more closed-minded or closed off to certain things because maybe it's the people, the parents telling you, and you don't want to hear from them, or you're just not ready yet to experience that. I wouldn't even gotten into personal development if I didn't have the right teacher or introduction, and I wasn't at a certain age of maturity. I didn't listen to, a lot of people see me as this like guy who reads, over 100 books a year and all this stuff, but really, I didn't read at all back in the day because I read a lot of fiction and then I stopped to just focus on school. And it was only when I got to a ripe age in college where I was just introduced to it in the right way, which was, hey, there's audiobooks. Hey, there's sometimes free ones that people upload to YouTube. And at the time, I wasn't into personal development, but I was starting to get into personal finance because there's this one audiobook. It's called like The Automatic Millionaire. And I was like, oh wow, there's books that like teach you how to be a millionaire. So I would listen to these while playing League of Legends. And that started me on the snowball journey that got me into all this personal development. So my point being is two things. One, you sometimes have to be patient and let time take its course and expose yourself to new things and be more open-minded, because there are passions that you may not know you have. Take Pokemon card collecting. Never thought I would get back into Pokemon cards ever. This is a binder version of a new, relatively new Japanese promo. And I just never thought I would get into that stuff again, because essentially that was my state at the time. But if you have an open mind and you keep exposing yourself to new hobbies and interests, you might find a different teacher that teaches it to you a way that you actually like. Or you may just be in a different time period, place in life with a different life situation that can change your perspective on it. And then lastly, you have to be open to the idea that you just have not yet discovered that passion yet. That's another possibility. There's definitely things that have yet to be invented. There's stuff that have yet to be really introduced. I mean, TikTok wasn't here a few years ago. Just think about that. Charli D'Amelio, all those people wouldn't exist without that. YouTube, Instagram, Vine, those were already occupied by some heavy juggernauts, so they wouldn't have been able to get in that way. But it doesn't have to be some mass social media platform that everyone knows about. It can be something small that maybe you just haven't heard about yet that even does exist, but you don't know it exists. For example, everyone in college is focused on these big categories of jobs: doctor, lawyer, scientist, psychologist, physical therapist. But there are all these categories of jobs that people would potentially enjoy that they just aren't aware of. Project manager, project architect, program manager, systems architect, stuff like that, you know, process manager, all these occupations in tech companies and stuff. So sometimes doing your research helps, sometimes exposing yourself, trying something new helps. But hopefully this video helped you out. Like, subscribe, comment, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you in the next video.